I'm Billy S, welcome to the channel. Today I'm revealing the results of my community ranking poll rating the main bosses of Shadow of the Erdtree, from easiest to hardest. I asked my voters to score each boss on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being insanely easy, 10 being insanely impossible. Added the results, worked out their average, bish bash bosh, boom. I didn't include every fight in the DLC, just the major Remembrance bosses, mandatory fights, and the Ancient Dragon Man and Jori Elder Inquisitor fights, as they are required if you want to reach Baal or Midra. For this series, I like to include voter comments in each segment, but with 747 voters, I can't possibly include everyone's thoughts, so I'll be limiting each segment to 3 voter comments each. With all that groundwork out of the way, my community, Shadow of the Erdtree, easiest to hardest bosses, ranked. Let me know your easiest and hardest fights down below. At number 16, we have Aaviier, Mother of Fingers, who scored a total average of 2.21 out of 10, and 401 votes for easiest boss. Found at the end of his questline, Aaviier attempts to slay you following the death of Meta, when his servant Yolan fails to finish you off. His soul abilities involve birthing easy-to-kill finger creepers and firing at you with glinting nail sorceries. His defense options are limited, and it's very easy to get him in a corner and hack away at him. Aaviier can teleport a very short distance away, but it means nothing when you can catch up to him before he's able to get another attack off. This boss is on the list for being at the end of a major questline, but he's not meant to be hard. He's not in full control of his new abilities as the Mother of Fingers, and us slaying him before he could learn to harness his potential is perhaps the best outcome for everyone involved. How did my voters feel? Aaviier might be the easiest boss I've ever seen in a FromSoft game. All I'll say is that their health bar was smaller than my stamina bar. I never saw an attack. I wish this fight was before Meta. It was an underwhelming ending to that storyline. I definitely agree with that last statement. There are ways to still make an easy boss put up even a slight bit more of a fight, and Aaviier doesn't reach that level at all. Incredibly underwhelming. Aaviier is obviously an absolute joke when it comes to difficulty. I think he's more of a lore fight. It's weird that he thinks he needs to hire someone to defeat Meta because he knows he isn't strong enough, but then somehow thinks he can beat us even though we have to be stronger than Meta to have defeated her. He's sadly Delulu. Exactly! What was Aaviier's plan? Ah yes, go kill Meta so I can siphon her energy and then I'll kill you to tie up the loose ends. Delusional doesn't even begin to describe it, and I think that's why this questline ends so weirdly. Aaviier is probably the funniest boss here in my experience because the NPC right before him is a tougher fight, and when he showed up he just teleported to the back of the church where his spells couldn't reach me. Genuinely had me set my controller down and have a good laugh before he went down in like 6 hits from my colossal weapon. From a sheer comedic perspective, I'm on board with this take. Aaviier is a mess. He's not ready for motherhood. He just had a finger creeper Mpreg fantasy that went a little bit too far. At number 15, we have the Ancient Dragon Man, who scored a total average of 2.83 out of 10, with 219 votes for easiest boss. Found in the depths of the Dragon's Pit, he's on this list solely because you have to get past him to fight Baal, but I wouldn't blame players for forgetting this fact after they finish the DLC. You fight the Ancient Dragon Man twice, once outside the dungeon as an invasion, and once in the boss arena where he tests you to see whether you're worthy to enter the realm of the dragons. In terms of difficulty, he's on the easier side for DLC NPC fights. He's no Black Jail Knight, and his lack of armor means he's not got a lot of defense. Instead, he relies on his Dragon Hunter's Great Katana to do all the work for him, and that reflects in his moveset. He can use its unique skill, Dragon Wound Slash, to strike at you from afar. He has a few hard-hitting combos he can launch into, and he's got a few Dragon Communion incantations up his sleeve like Dragon Maw and Magma Breath. But it's nothing the player hasn't dealt with before. As long as you're not getting too greedy with your hits, you'll be fine. His difficulty, I'd say, is underbaked because of his appearance as an invader. The fights are exactly the same, just he has more health as a boss. You already know how to fight him. As many voters pointed out to me, the only threatening thing about him is his name. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the Ancient Dragon Man. Voters, over to you. Ancient Dragon Man was such a cool boss. Although he wasn't hard, I really liked that we fought him before his arena, only to realize that he's a boss later on. He has a cool moveset, and I really like that they added another dragon form. To an extent, I like the concept of showcasing a boss prior to their boss fight, but I think that only works when the boss has new abilities in their proper encounter, and that's why I think a lot of players were underwhelmed. I do agree that the new dragon form is brilliant, and I wish we could just, make dragon people from the start of the game. Dragonborn deserve to exist in Souls too. I'm really confused as to why Ancient Dragon Man was included on this list. I guess he's the only NPC that would be mandatory in order to fight every other boss, but he doesn't feel on par with the other picks quality-wise, which I feel is quite unfair to him, as this isn't what he was designed for. I've explained why I chose to include him, even if I agree he doesn't hack it compared to the other bosses on this list. But then I think about Jory, Elder Inquisitor, who we'll get to soon, who shares a similar role, but actually has unique mechanics baked into his boss fight. Why couldn't we gotten more of that with the Ancient Dragon Man? That's why I want to highlight him, so we have that comparison. Ancient Dragon Man. For some reason that name just makes me smile, especially in the dark fantasy world of Elden Ring. Difficulty-wise, well, he does hit hard enough to be a threat early game. I mean, he's an NPC fight, so it really depends on how a player can handle those. I do appreciate that most of the NPCs show off gear and new abilities, like that dragon transformation, which have given me ideas for potential New Game Plus builds. I like this comment because it showcases exactly why the NPC fights in this DLC exist. It acknowledges that some players find these fights tough, because NPC enemies do function differently to your regular bosses, and the way they use to showcase new gear, abilities, transformations, and the like is honestly pretty smart. FromSoft aren't just making bosses to be difficulty checks after all, they have multi-purpose uses, and Dragon Man happens to be a walking sales pitch for his weapon and transformation. I'd say it worked. At number 14, we have Jory, Elder Inquisitor, who scored a total average of 3.93 out of 10, with 41 votes for easiest boss. Found at the end of the Darklight Catacombs, withholding access to the Abyssal Woods, while Jory holds a similar role as the Ancient Dragon Man, I find his fight has more of a concept which allows him to shine better. Now, the audience doesn't agree, as he scored 120 votes for least favourite boss, second only to Commander Gaius's 178 votes, but I'll admit I'm surprised. Like, I can see why Jory would be disliked. He's a caster fight, his magic hits hard, and his summons can crowd the arena as his health drops down, but I found his health pool surprisingly tame, and he went down in just 2 attempts compared to so many other bosses on this list for me. Difficulty-wise, I think he's right where he should be. So why is he so disliked by our voters? I really hated Jory. I could never outrun or roll the spirals of air, and it kept locking me in to getting hit till death. The summons were annoying, but not impossible, but the magic spam with all the enemies you have to track felt both unfair and frustrating. Yeah, the Spirit incantation is definitely the toughest part of Jory's kit, because it lasts for far longer than you'd expect. Has you constantly moving to stay out of harm's way, and if there are summons on the field at the same time, you're having to dodge both the magic and those extra attacks. I'm not sure if I was doing something wrong, but for me, Jory the Elder Inquisitor was genuinely the most unpleasant and frustrating boss I have ever faced in a From Software game. I'm dead serious, worse than the Bed of Chaos. The amount of enemies on screen and all the magic projectiles were way too much, even with my Mimic tier. Without a doubt, one of the worst things From Software has created, in my opinion. It's rare where I feel so out of the loop in my experience versus that of everyone else, but at least I can see where people are coming from. Jory is all about managing the crowds, and in my case, my strategy was to find the openings to rush for the boss and keep attacking them so the fight didn't drag on. I imagine this type of battle with a lot going on could cause people a lot of trouble, and in that sense, I do fully understand if it just isn't a pleasant experience for you. I'm not gonna invalidate your opinions. Jory the Elder Inquisitor is a fascinating concept for a fight. Spellcaster and From games are hit or miss, but I think Jory is a real hit. And it could have easily been obnoxious, but the fact his summons act as attacks really makes this a fight where positioning is key. I also love his arena. For one, it was such a sudden tone shift, and gameplay-wise, you have plenty of cover from his and his summons golden arcs. Had to include at least one positive Jory post. While I do think his arena could stand to be a tad larger, perhaps maybe move the trees on the sides so there's no potential for getting pinned against them, this user understands what I enjoyed, which was the positioning aspect, as well as how the summons didn't function as enemies, but as attacks. Heck, you can even remove the summons with a hit or two, which is a really nice addition. Whether you like Jory or not really comes down to playstyle and tolerance for caster bullshit, but we all agree that overall, he's an easy fight. At number 13, we have the Golden Hippopotamus, who scored a total average of 4.85 out of 10, with 108 votes for least favourite boss, the third highest, and not a single vote for favourite boss. You all hate this animal. The hippo is a master at fucking up your camera with its fast movements and high damage upon your first encounter. You'll likely need to upgrade your Shadow Tree Blessing to stand a chance, and even then you'll have to contend with some brutal combos that leave you on the back foot more often than not. The Golden Hippo's grab was a big point of contention in my boss ranking video on the game, and as it turns out, it was the same for the dev team, as since my playthrough, the grab was patched to have a tighter hitbox. If this makes the boss fairer, I haven't tested yet, as I haven't done a second playthrough, but I like to think that's why the boss landed this low in the first place. It's interesting because I died to this boss a lot more than some of the others still to come on this list, and yet I fully agree with the hippo being this far down. Perhaps the voters can shed some light for us? The Golden Hippo is just one of those bosses that seems super out of place where you fight it. Entering the Shadow Keep, you're expecting to fight knights and other swordsmen, and then you run into this nightmare. The charge grab is a nightmare to deal with, and with this fight, I don't know if it's the boss having decent moves that makes it tough, or if it's the camera, cause both seem to really annoy the hell out of me. Yeah, I knew the grab would be the focus. It may have been nerfed, but the ramifications of its original state are still felt throughout the community. But I definitely think the camera also doesn't help. The moment you're pressed up against a corner, it's time to suffer. And once it enters its enraged state with the quill attacks, it becomes a crapshoot. Sometimes I'd dodge the incantations with ease, other times I'd be shredded like a wet paper towel. Not everyone feels so negative though. I find myself to be a Golden Hippo apologist. I think it's a great boss in that it's extremely simple. It only has a few attacks, but each is insanely damaging, which even on subsequent playthroughs keeps you humble, as even a high Shadow Tree level won't save you. I like the simplicity of it. The Golden Hippo could easily be seen as a palate cleanser. Just coming from Rolana and her insane combo potential, he's a much simpler boss in terms of design, and is only really a danger when it comes to his damage output. With his fixed hitboxes, I think he'll be much easier on a second run, and that likely contributes to his lower placement. Plus, objectively, other enemies in this DLC with more complex movesets should feel harder, because there's way more to remember and learn. Compared to other bosses on this list, he just felt very simple. The only real difficulty comes from the grab attack having a janky hitbox, where it felt like whether you got grabbed or not relied less on your dodge timing and more on luck. The second phase didn't change much for me as far as difficulty went. In fact, the boss getting more moves that were not the grab attack resulted in me getting grabbed less when that phase started. This really is the equivalent of finding a silver lining in a boss fight. Ah yes, his second phase that introduced more attacks was certainly something, but it meant I got grabbed less. Honestly, that type of mentality I need to take on my next run of the game because it is positive to a fault. At number 12, we have the Shadow Tree Avatar, who scored a total average of 5.09 out of 10. I'm still in awe that, not including Sekiro, the Shadow Tree Avatar is the second boss fight in the Soulsborne series to have 3 health bars, and I absolutely love it for that. Regular viewers know that I have an insane soft spot for the Shadow Tree Avatar. It feels like a Dark Souls 3 boss that somehow found its way into Elden Ring, and I think it works perfectly. The moveset starts off relatively tame, with a few combo variations, some devastating thorn attacks, a bit of magic, and that golden head slam grab. But as you go into each subsequent phase, the moveset changes up. It gains a 3-stage charge attack, it follows up more combos with unsafe thorns, it gains more melee range and has far more aggression. It's a weed that truly needs killing, but is fighting so hard to stay alive. The last phase, where it uses its light explosion to try and end the fight, only to wilt into exhaustion so he can finish it off, it's pure poetry in motion. I will always prefer simpler fights with easy to understand movesets over something like Radahn, Consort of Miquella any day. And I know I'm not the only person who loves this fight. The Shadow Tree avatar somehow takes dash attacks, AoEs, tracking spells, and bleed damage, and meshes them together into a fantastic blend of satisfying and relatively fair attacks. 3 phases were an unexpected but reasonable surprise, and I always love the trope of a boss using all of its energy and power, exhausting itself late in a fight out of desperation. The reason why this fight works so well is because the moveset is given time to breathe. You have very clear moments where the head is vulnerable to attack, and most of his moves end with his weak point being exposed. Ironically, it's very Darky to Midir coded, and that's the funniest thing I've written in months. I think that if the Shadow Tree avatar had at least 1 or 2 moves added in Phase 2 and 3 respectively, it could be a more enjoyable boss. I feel that its moves flow together pretty decently, given the 3 stages it has, and even though for lore reasons it doesn't get more than 1 new move with Phase 3, I think maybe a little more would put it higher on my difficulty list. Saying that, it is my favourite boss, love the funny sunflower. While I certainly get the sentiment that because this boss was your favourite you want to see them harder to experience them for longer, I guess I don't subscribe to this concept myself. Because the Shadow Tree avatar was an easier experience, I was more lenient and accepting of the 3 health bars it had, and I feel it gaining more moves would actually inhibit my enjoyment of the fight. But I personally prefer when bosses innovate on their existing moveset over adding a ton of new flashy attacks to deal with, so it's just my personal preference. Shadow Tree Avatar is one of the only DLC bosses I think is genuinely badly designed. Its gimmick is kinda neat, but mostly results in a lot of waiting around, especially since all 3 phases are basically the same apart from a single attack. Its attacks are also so huge and so janky that the fight legitimately felt impossible, until I managed to land a headshot with Comet and take like 1/3 of its health in one go, at which point the fight did a 180 and became trivially easy. Yeah, I want to point out that every boss got comments along the lines of, "This is the only one that's badly designed," so I don't really want to listen to that hyperbole anymore. But I do respect when some people have a vastly different experience to my own. There is a lot of waiting in this fight, I can see why that would turn some people away who would want something more immediately engaging, and certain attacks can feel tough to dodge, especially when it's whipping its vines around, or using thorns to ruin your FPS. But the AoEs feel fair once you know the timings, and the grab can be punished so much if you're not caught in it. There are actually a ton of openings here, and I expect this fight to be optimized to hell and back within a few months. Definitely one of the easier fights of the DLC, but one I won't soon forget. At number 11, we have Romina, Saint of the Bud, who scored a total average of 5.14 out of 10. Here we have another boss I'd consider to be a palate cleanser, but that doesn't stop Romina from being a great time. She focuses on Scarlet Rot, and her centipede appendages mean that she's got a surprising amount of reach for her attacks. I love the move where she launches into the air and her stinger flashes as she slams back down to the ground. More moves with visual aids to indicate when to dodge, block, or parry would go a long way towards making these bosses easier to learn and eventually master. I found I wasn't inflicted with Scarlet Rot all that much, and with my high vigor stat, even if I did get rotted, I was able to tough it out and withstand the effect until it ran dry. Romina's only attack that feels a tad unfair is her main special attack, where she whips up rot butterflies across the field, as the whirlwind effect damages players immediately if they're too close to the boss. Beyond that, I find her moves to be fun to dodge, great to block, and her health pool is just right for the type of fight she's trying to be. She definitely could have benefited from an introductory cutscene though, something similar to Quelaag just to give us some stage presence, and so we could really take in that brilliant monster design. It disheartens me to see Romina always go to the ends of lists. She was one of my personal favourites from Shadow of the Erdtree. I thought her attacks were very smooth and solid and extremely fun to dodge. Maybe it's because I fought her underleveled and before Mesmer, but I thought she was a great boss. I think everyone should experience her fight earlier on in the DLC, so she can stand a fighting chance, and you get to feel the amazing deadly dance with her unexpectedly fluid design. As someone else who also fought Romina before I took on Mesmer, I'm in complete agreement. There's a reason why when I ranked my favourite bosses from the DLC, she hit number 5. Like the Shadow Tree avatar, she's just a really clean fight, with a simple yet refined moveset that would feel more at home in something like Dark Souls 3 or early game Elden Ring. It's not an endgame level fight, but it doesn't need to be, and she still provides a decent challenge. After all, once you beat her, it's onto Enir Elim, where you face one of the toughest NPC gank fights, and Radahn. Her difficulty is fine. Romina was one of the final bosses I faced, given that I did all the optional content first. So after fighting the likes of Midra and Bale, Romina fell short. Her attacks were very easy to dodge, and even when she did hit me, it was little damage dealt. The Scarlet Rot was never an issue, and after finding out she was weak to fire, I melted her health bar faster than Radahn kills you upon entering his arena. The fight ended faster than it should have for being the penultimate boss. I really wanted to like Romina. Her design is unique, akin to past Dark Souls amalgamations, and the lore around her, although small, is great to read on. I just wish I got a fight worthy of a true saint. This is the downside to Romina, in that if you fight after doing Bale and Midra, it's like Dark Beast Pal from Bloodborne all over again. She becomes too easy to the point where she doesn't get the opportunity to make that impression on the player. I think she'll be a bit more popular with the Challenge Run and Rune Level 1 communities, who'll be fighting her with less powerful builds, and I really look forward to seeing it. Romina, Saint of the 420 Blazeit, was my favourite boss and my most enjoyable fight in the entire DLC. Her moves were more of a dance to avoid, dodging under her to get to either side, or jumping over her spear swings. There was a beauty to her spells as well, like filling the whole arena with pink bursts of butterflies. It's dangerous to avoid, as those butterfly bombs leave only a few choice spots to stand. She has the same rollout move as the Godskin Noble that will knock you on your ass if you're not careful, with a finishing move that will bonk you on the head if you mistime your dodge. Her jump attack with the underspike is so well telegraphed, it's easy enough to dodge and punish every time. Anyways, to all the half-bug ladies of FromSoft, I love you forever. The fact that she has the Godskin Noble rollout move, yet it feels fair under her guidance, is enough to prove she's a good fight in my books. She really combines a special grace with her attacks, which contrasts wonderfully with her monstrous design. Compared to Malenia, who honestly looks a hot boo-boo mess in her Goddess of Rot form, Romina has accepted the rot for what it is, and she looks damn good doing it. She isn't insanely hard, but I love her nevertheless. At number 10, we have Meta, Mother of Fingers, who scored a total average of 5.46 out of 10. The comparison has been made before, but I'll make it again. Meta is the Ebrietas of Elden Ring, though I'd say Meta is the harder of the two upon first glance. She's got lasers to fire at the player from afar, so you want to close that distance as quickly as possible. No matter the direction you come from, Meta has a way to counterattack, which makes it hard to figure out the best approach. From the front, you're in range of all her smashes and slams, as well as getting a front row seat to her ability to birth finger creepers all over you. From the side, you have to deal with the scrabbling fingers that crawl towards you with the intent of devastating your health bar. Ironically, when she reaches her enraged state, she becomes much easier because her more powerful attacks have easy ways to trivialize them. Her levitating spin can be shielded through, the minefield of exploding orbs has a ton of safe spots within, and her orbital laser, while tough to figure out at first, does have a safe spot between where the lasers are hitting and the AoE that pushes you back outwards from the boss. At worst case, you can just tank it. She's very spectacle with a high damage output, but doesn't go quite far enough with her attacks to justify substance. I personally wanted more finger-based attacks to really lean into the theming, but instead we got celestial energy blasts. Meta is my absolute favourite fight visually and lore-wise. It's an absolute spectacle, and the revelations we get about the fingers all bring the game together very nicely. The fight works great thematically, the arena is also stunning, and the quest to access it is very intriguing. Meta's only downside is that it is a little too easy and the gameplay isn't too fun. She's going to be working those lore buffs out for a while with all the revelations she brings, but as far as the gameplay goes, her charm runs its course relatively quickly. It doesn't help that her phase 1 is hilariously weak to guard counters, which came in handy for a lot of bosses this DLC. Is Meta one of the easier fights in the DLC? Absolutely. Are a lot of her attacks easy to dodge? Yup. Does that Armageddon laser attack feel impossible to dodge without an extreme level of cheese from a specific build? Yup. The difference between Commander Gaius and Meta with these attacks is that Gaius can use his bullshit attack from the start of his fight, while Meta can use it maybe twice maximum before she dies, so she's more manageable. In my case, I don't think I ever saw the orbital laser more than once per attempt. But I'm cool with that. I think certain spectacle attacks don't need to be overused against the player. Think Midir and Placidus Axe's lasers or Radahn's meteor strikes. Meta's most bullshit attack is so rare that it becomes a non-factor on subsequent runs, a good trait to have. Meta felt impossibly hard at first until I realized the strat. Just stay in front of her, seriously. I went from near ripping my hair out at this finger abomination to breezing past her while half focusing on a YouTube vid by this simple positional change. But fuck that one rotating gravity beam move in phase 2, still haven't figured out how to dodge it. Yup, staying in front of Meta means you won't get caught by that side finger attack, and one of her slams can be avoided by staying up close and personal because she has a small hole within her fingers you can stand between. Meta starts off so tough, but once you understand a few of her tricks, it's like learning how a magician does their magic acts. The curtain is pulled back, and all that's left is to smack those fingers so they can't finger anyone else anymore. At number 9, we have Needle Knight Leda, who scored a total average of 5.86 out of 10. Found atop Enir Elim, Leda will challenge you to a duel in her world, where you'll have to take her and her allies on to open the path to Miquella. While technically not a boss fight, as there are no official boss health bars, I still consider it a fight because it's a mandatory battle against multiple NPC-style enemies. The difficulty comes from the variant you choose to tackle, as depending on the way you progress through the DLC and which questlines you choose to follow, you'll have a different setup of opponents. I had what I'd appear to be the best version of the fight, where all the potential participants appear. On my side, Tjolier and Ansbach. On Leda's side, Dryleaf Dane, the Hornsent, Freya, and more. A 5v3 that was absolutely brutal. Hornsent could one-shot my character irregardless of build thanks to his magic. Moore was obsessed with chucking hefty scarlet rot pots in my direction to fuck with me, and anytime I'd reach Leda, I'd have no health left and would be forced to sneak in while they're distracted with my allies. Fuck doing this fight solo. I like feeling happy. I had a hard time, I'd rank this fight higher myself, but the voters may have felt differently given this boss has so many different permutations, meaning it just misses out on the top half of my list. I understand the people who don't summon and why they do it. I understand thinking it makes difficult 1v1 bosses less engaging, but I truly think people who fight Leda without summons just like misery at this point, especially those who then complain about the fight. I don't think the game could have made it more clear that summons are encouraged and expected for this fight. I mean, it doesn't even have a boss health bar. Is it my favorite fight? Not even close, but I just don't get people's refusal to summon in spots like this where the game is saying you are supposed to. Say it louder for the people in the back, there are some fights in this game where the developers have clearly intended a way for it to be beaten, a way that is narratively satisfying and fun to play. If you purposefully choose not to interact with those mechanics and then complain about the fight's difficulty, I feel like that's not the game's fault, that's on you. I felt the execution was a bit lacking. I was running a dex build, so I didn't have enough damage to finish any NPCs off before the next one came in. And even with Ansbach drawing some aggro, I felt like I was being unfairly ganked. Gameplay-wise, I honestly prefer the gank squad from Dark Souls 2's Crown of the Sunken King DLC. In that fight, you have an arena designed around being able to separate the two melee NPCs, and there's a ranged NPC you can rush in and finish off. In Leda's fight, you just have a big, flat arena that makes it hard to lose anyone. And Moore, the one ranged fighter, blocks with a huge shield, so he's not necessarily easy to kill, even one-on-one. It really is a cool story moment that takes your actions into account, which is why it's not my least favorite boss in the DLC, but to me, the fight itself leaves much to be desired. Okay, for a second there, I was getting ready to side-eye you bringing up the gank squad, but your point is actually so real, bestie, I respect it. Why on earth did we have to have this fight on a flat, sandy battlefield with no way to break cover? I get it aesthetically, but gameplay-wise it meant there was no way to lose any of the invaders once they were on your trail. Even just having a slight elevation change to the arena, where maybe the outside of the ring was on a lower or upper level, would have changed things up significantly. Needle Knight Ladder has to be the most variable fight difficulty in the whole series, hence where I gave it an exactly middle score. You have the usual, which is your build, level, playstyle, etc. Then on top of that, there's if you've found plenty of shadow fragments, and finally the results of your questlines and if you use your helper NPCs. If you give Moore a new purpose, give the letter to Freya, and rescue Hornsent but don't give him revenge against Messmer, you end up with a 5v3, assuming you summon and completed Tiolier's questline, or a 5v2 otherwise. Taking the fight 5v1 with things like Moore's Rot and Dane and Hornsent's pure aggression is insanely difficult, and only the best crowd control or highest DPS can get you through. On the other hand, you could potentially make this a 2v3 with just Dane and Leda opposing you, utterly stomping those fools. The only thing I can think that's similar to this is the Giant Souls to reduce Vendrick's defenses in Dark Souls 2, and even then it's not really close. This fight is so unique in its challenge, definitely one of the many highlights of the DLC. I really can't help but respect the design of this boss in concept. I love a variable fight that taps into everything you've done up to this point, and the fact this fight is so hard to pin down is likely why it lands so middle of the road in today's video. The easy and hard votes balance each other out, while most voters kept their scores within the 5s, 6s, and 7s. A divisive fight with a divisive overall score. We're halfway through our difficulty ranking of the Shadow of the Erdtree bosses, but you know what we're also halfway through? My goal of reaching 35,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. If you want to help the channel out and you're enjoying the videos so far, consider parrying that subscribe button right there so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos, or go the extra mile and become a channel member. It's $4.99 a month. It gets you 24-hour early access to a majority of my videos, as long as I'm not behind schedule, and there will be future perks to come at some point, possibly September onwards, we'll see, after summer's over and it's not boiling hot in the room, ooh. But thank you so much for tuning in, back to the video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this community ranking. At number 8, we have the Putrescent Knight, who scored a total average of 6.27 out of 10. If this were my own personal list, I think I'd have the Putrescent Knight a bit higher, since even on my winning run, I don't feel I ever perfectly understood his moveset. But I can't deny he has an insane weakness to holy damage that can be exploited to high heaven if you want an easy victory. The challenge comes from the fact that the knight is almost always on horseback, meaning he can make a lot of distance following his combos very quickly. Combine that with his ranged boomerang throwing attacks, as well as his blue flames that he whips out around half health, and you've got a lot to keep track of for a surprisingly small, nimble boss. For me, it was the combo where he jumps off the horse and has it charge at you alongside him multiple times that was the toughest for me to overcome. One fuck up and it felt like all my health was gone. While I was never able to capitalize on it, maybe others had an easier time, I don't know. Honestly, I'm really curious to see the voters' takes on this boss because it's one of the less talked about ones in the DLC. I think that the Putrescent Knight is criminally underrated, and a completely balanced fight. As far as difficulty goes, I think the boss is fairly challenging, but the fight itself is very fair, unlike other bosses, Gaius. Each attack gives a telegraph, and there are always opportunities to get attacks in, provided you dodge correctly. I think people find this boss to be super hard because of the fire attacks. However, as long as you know how to click the jump button, you should be fine. I like this boss a lot because it doesn't rely on artificial difficulty to put up a good challenge. That being said, I don't think the boss is very hard, and as long as you know how to click the jump button, which may be hard for some people who are used to roll spamming, this boss shouldn't take you more than a few attempts. I think there were a lot of us, myself included, sitting here feeling like chumps hearing someone say this shouldn't take us more than a few attempts. I'm not surprised some people found the attack strings easy to handle, but if the boss only took a few attempts, it wouldn't be at number 8 on this list. I do agree it's a very fair boss, there's not a lot of bullshit, everything is manageable, but the timings for dodges and blocks are very tight while the boss deals massive damage if you're caught, which builds up to create an atmosphere that can feel very frustrating. I fought the Putrescent Knight about a third of the way through my playthrough of the DLC, and I was using dual Holy Straightsword build, so I was doing great damage to him. However, he still gave me quite a challenge as he just moved in a way that wasn't intuitive to my brain. This wasn't a bad thing though, as he became one of my highlights in the DLC with his erratic movements and memorable air that he had about him. None of his other attacks felt impossible to manage, and each one felt like it left a nice opening for me to do a jumping attack. My favourite attack was definitely the spinny blade move that he has, because I love the way that his horse combos into him, but then you get a larger attack opportunity when he remounts. Even his frostbite flames didn't feel too overwhelming for me once I realised the trick was to jump over them. Another glowing review for the Putrescent Knight, though one that acknowledges the difficulty curve. Perhaps I personally found him tough because I fought him before completing the Shadow Keep, thus not having the best Shadow Tree Blessing level. I'm honestly not sure. But it's fascinating to see just how loved this underrated boss actually is. The last voter comment on this boss echoes what I believe are my own thoughts though, so let's hear them. It's not the hardest boss, looking at Uradan, but I personally struggled a lot with the Putrescent Knight. I really seem to struggle with delayed attacks, which he does plenty of. When he leaps off his horse is also particularly chaotic. I love his design, but his fight just never managed to click with me. He's one of the bosses I'd quite like to rematch to learn them better. It's a good fight, well designed. I think people will come around on it, myself included, as the DLC ages, or people will optimize a holy build to kill it in 3 hits and it'll be forgotten to the annals of history. Which will it be, I wonder? At number 7, we have the Divine Beast, Dancing Lion, who scored a total average of 6.51 out of 10. The first main boss of the DLC for a majority of players, I honestly think From Software set us all up. We go into Bellarat, we're able to make it through the whole dungeon with a fairly low Shadow Tree Blessing count, and then the Dancing Lion hands us our ass. It has the same difficulties as many of the more elegant bosses in FromSoft's lineup, with the animations being very flowy and hard to read. He's got a massive pool of moves to choose from, and all of them hit like a truck. That triple spin with the stone breath is brutal. Or how about the delayed tail thwack that I could never get the timing for? Camera's also a dangerous foe in this fight. Found myself pinned into a corner so much I had to do the fight locked off to have any element of success. Didn't help that I had frame drops on my PS4, which was actually a first for me in Elden Ring. But then you have the lion going into its elemental variations way before half health, just to really ramp up the difficulty. Lightning, ice, and wind. I think every form has something difficult to contend with, and while most of the moveset is relatively similar between forms, you've got to watch out for lightning strikes, ice AoEs, or wind bites and slashes. He's such a step up to me compared to previous fights on today's list, so let's see how the voters want to jump in. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion really lives up to its name, because this fight feels like a dance, and it really felt like I needed to find the rhythm to this boss. The moveset can feel very erratic, but learning it was so satisfying after getting into the DLC. That, plus the mystical feeling that the intro dialogue, the design, and the music gave me, makes this one of my favourite fights in the DLC, even though there are mechanical problems with it. On atmosphere alone, the Dancing Lion is fabulous. The music and the way it changes its instrumental slightly depending on the form the lion is taking, as well as many moves being in sync with the beat. If anything, listening to the music might actually help players to react better to the boss. Maybe it's worth giving it a try. Dancing Lion is the only boss FromSoft has ever made that has made me feel that there were too many special effects going on at once for me to see what was going on. Yes, even including Consort and Bale. Pair that with the questionable camera and that one move where he does the spin breath that feels nigh impossible to dodge if you're in melee range, and he's only one of 2 bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree, other being Bale, that made me go and search for more fragments. There's also that one in Rao that has a Deathblight phase plus basilisks, which is just overkill. Definitely with you on the visual effects. Given it was my first fight, I wasn't expecting quite so much flair and drama with every attack. And when I get overwhelmed, it takes a while for me to acclimate towards everything. Doesn't help that many of those special effects come at the cost of readability, so you have to be focused in order to know what's fully happening. That being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with needing to leave a boss to search for more fragments. I did that with quite a few fights in this DLC, and that's what From Software intend for the players to do in the first place. Now this is deviating, but for our final voter comment, they want to talk about the Lions rematch, so here we go. I'd like to shout out the Rao variant of Divine Beast Dancing Lion for its absurd Deathblight phase, which spawns various basilisks into the fight out of nowhere and makes several normal attacks significantly more dangerous. I thought it was a great way to make the encounter tougher without simply buffing the health and damage. Not only is this phase funny, but it also hard counters any summoned help and gives the battle a sudden frenetic energy which made the rematch feel distinct and worthwhile. It felt like From were having fun with the concept of fighting the boss again, and I hope they continue to add unexpected fun twists to open world rematch battles in their future games to help keep their difficulty fresh. While I certainly agree that this edition of the Deathblight phase made the fight unique compared to the original variant, and I am personally fine with a Dancing Lion rematch because of how early in the DLC we fight him versus how late in the DLC Rao is, I'm sorry, that Deathblight ticked me off to high heaven. It just feels a tad cheap, even if it's got that From Software troll energy plastered all over it, different strokes for different folks. The Dancing Lion received a ton of praise overall in the comments, but I do think part of its difficulty is artificial, when looking at the camera problems, the tells for attacks that feel very hard to read due to how close you often have to be to the boss so it obscures a lot of your vision, stuff like that. I totally can learn and improve on this fight though, and its spectacle makes me want to get better. Not bad for 7th place. At number 6, we have Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame, who scored a total average of 6.55 out of 10. Of all the endgame fights, the consensus is that Midra is the easiest of the lot. He doesn't have the insane HP pool of the Consort, nor the aggression of Messmer's first phase, nor the arena blasting AoEs of Bale. But what Midra does have is a moveset that harkens back to the older games, with a methodical and generally unsettling series of animations. This creature flits across the battlefield, flames of insanity rendering our tarnished into silence. His attack strings are dodgeable and not that lengthy, but if you're caught, you'll feel the punishment. His madness blasts have a conal effect that makes them hard to dodge in the first place, and by the time he's shooting full lasers across the arena to blast you to smithereens, you're busy jamming to the amazing OST and trying to figure out how to get in close to do more damage. The fact that at any moment you could proc madness and be rendered immobile for a few seconds, allowing Midra to carve you up or impale you in his grab attack, is the stuff of nightmares, and makes the boss feel very dangerous. Status effects that take control away from the player for a short time will always feel more deadly than something like rot or poison. Midra was easily one of the highlights for players everywhere, taking 131 votes for favourite boss, the second highest of the poll. And I'm sure those voters are still seething that I had Midra at number 9 on my personal list, I'm sorry! So what are they saying? Well, I had 93 different Midra mentions in my voter comments, and only 3 can be highlighted, so you'll clearly liked him. I ranked Midra very low in terms of difficulty, not because he has an easy moveset or anything, but because the build I used during my playthrough utterly countered him to the point where it was barely a fight. 2 charged R2s were all it took from my colossal sunflower to stagger him, meaning that I could basically stunlock him throughout the fight. I mean, look at the guy, he's withering bones, of course he staggers easily. I also took advantage with my blood tax build, stunning him and sapping his health to regain my own, and I hold no regrets. I'll learn his moveset on my second playthrough, thank you very much. Although I do love that someone fucked him up with a giant sunflower. Midra, despite transforming into a little chaos incarnate, is one of the most fair and methodical bosses in the DLC. His moves are all precisely timed, intuitive to learn, while still being pretty engaging. Though this makes him somewhat easier when it comes to DLC Remembrance bosses, his fair yet fun gameplay alongside stellar presentation and boss theme make him one of my favourite bosses across every Souls game. The fact that FromSoft were able to take a boss whose primary gimmick involved a very intrusive status effect and make a fight that feels genuinely fair and balanced around said status is insane. Impressive work. Definitely gives me a lot of food for thought. Midra is my favourite boss in the entire game based on how intuitive his moveset is to learn. His only real variations are whether he does his elegant double spin once or twice, or when he takes an extra stab with the barbs erupting at the end of a combo. Besides that, I feel like a Souls vet has a real chance to beat Midra first try, even under-leveled, with the same satisfaction that comes with mastering a more complex boss. The phase 2 transition is amazing, and his second phase is just as intuitive with the increased danger of the madness proc adding a fitting, but not overwhelming element to the fight. I truly think this is an example of FromSoft perfectly balancing a boss specifically for Souls vets that is minimally frustrating and maximum fun. The way you talk about Midra, it's like, I really wish I didn't feel rushed in my playthrough when I fought him, because he feels like an absolute blast to face without any gimmicks. It's clear that his moveset is tailored for his fight perfectly well, and Souls vets will adapt to his fight with minimal pushback. In a DLC where we're dealing with some busted hitboxes from Gaius and the Hippo, or brutal endgame challenges like Radahn, having a very tough yet fair boss in the form of Midra is an oasis in a large desert. At number 5, we have Commander Gaius, who scored a total average of 7.11 out of 10. If I had to go off my experiences with Gaius, I don't feel like I had quite as toxic a time as the rest of the player base, who crowned him as their least favourite boss of the DLC with 178 votes. But I know exactly why people hate him. It's his charge move. Pre-patch, Gaius would always start near the fog door as you entered, and he would always use his charge attack to close distance. It had an insanely tight dodge window that I could never get the hang of, so I just shield tanked it every time. Now, they've changed the fight so he always spawns on the far side of the arena, allowing you to hop on Torrent and get to him before he can start his charge. But for a while there, that was hell. It's a shame because if you ignore that awful hitbox, I actually like Commander Gaius. I think his melee attacks are fair, and the fact you still have to be careful with your positioning while shielding is refreshing. He's weak to guard counters, so I was able to stun him a lot, knocking him into his enraged state pretty early. And once the gravity magic kicked into gear, I felt his new moves were pretty responsive and mostly fair. It's amazing how, at least for me, a single move can completely change my perspective on a boss. I expect the voter comments here are going to be a shit show, let's get into it. I have never, in my Souls journey, been so frustrated at a boss as much as I was with Gaius. I made a vow to myself I was determined to only roll through his initial charge when I walked through the fog door. As you might expect, this did not go so well. It ended up with me walking through the fog around 150 times and getting my head kicked in immediately, so quickly that my rune mark would often be inside the grace room. I'd say I rolled it perfectly around 15 times without his stupid hitbox affecting me. And this is why FromSoft had to patch Gaius to the other side of the arena for future attempts. Give players a chance to see where he is and adapt. Let them hop on Torrent to outrun him, all that jazz was needed. It's a shame we keep asking for Torrent to be playable in more boss fights, and yet it never feels like the fights are fully designed with him in mind. This may be a hot take, but I really enjoy Commander Gaius. At first I thought he sucked, the chief reason being the charge, and I will concede that the charge isn't the most intuitive or fun move to dodge, requiring tricky movement with Torrent or dismount iframes to consistently avoid. Having beaten the DLC 3 times now and bashing my head against a wall for hours upon hours, his moveset makes sense. I love his 7-hit combo, often dodging 2 swings with 1 precise dodge before he's left open for a counterattack. I think people need to learn when Gaius' openings are, as you can sneak hits in the middle of some moves, such as his Meteor Toss. I love the purple gravity effects, it reminds me of my favourite base game boss Radahn. Sometimes he moves away and you have to chase him down, but overall I find his moveset to be challenging to learn, but ultimately rewarding to master. This was my experience with the boss as well. He started off fair, got frustrating for a while, but eventually looped his way back to being fun for me after I figured more of his moveset out. He's not a perfect fight, nor is he winning any awards, but figuring out when to counter during his long combos is so fucking satisfying, feels spectacular. As a great sword user who was too stubborn to change his build, Commander Gaius was an absolute nightmare and felt incredibly unfair. His charge attack on a medium load character feels like it only gives 0.5 seconds to dodge at the precise time, and if you fail, even with 80 vigor and full Radahn set, it will take around 50% of your health. Oh, what's that? Does that sound too easy? Well, how about after being hit with the full force of a speeding train and losing most of your HP, you try to heal like any normal player would, and get ready to get hit with his annoying gravity attack that will either stop you from healing or negate most of the health you just recovered. And if you are stupid enough to use a large weapon, be ready to never be able to punish most of his attacks, as after every hit you will not have enough time to dodge the next one. Up until Gaius, I was able to beat all the bosses and challenges without ever using a summon, but him and Radahn are the only two bosses where I just felt like I could not win without summons. The only difference between the two was that Radahn just felt like an incredibly hard but good boss that I just wasn't skilled enough to beat, while Gaius felt like a horribly designed boss that I just didn't want to deal with anymore. While I do firmly believe that every boss needs to be feasibly beatable with any type of build, I think it would be rather shallow of me to knock a boss down for having a proficiency against certain types of weapons and speeds. Like, let's be real here, strength users have it fucking easy in most Souls games. So having a few bosses that really push the envelope, even if it may feel unfair, is honestly fine by me. The lesson really is, fuck that charge attack. But it's the same thing we said to Waterfowl Dance, and look how many people can avoid it now. Mastery will come with time. At number 4, we have Messmer the Impaler, who scored a total average of 8.01 out of 10. We're hitting the big names now, and those 18 inches of Messmer are your favourite Shadow of the Erdtree boss, with 310 votes. From the moment you enter his boss arena, Messmer steals the scene. But I love that instead of being threatening, he's bogged down by this 9-to-5 job he's working. Every time he kills you, he sounds so fucking bored out of his mind, so done with this dead-end job, and he's not even in the coolest spire of his Shadow Keep. This is a man going through depression, and he needs a shower, a makeover, and a little bit of therapy. Instead, he comes at us with a 2-phase boss fight that starts off insanely hard. His initial combos are fast, with spear flurries that feel so good to avoid or block, but which require pinpoint timing and reflexes to dodge. Messmer's Assault, his longest combo, where spears are up from the ground at the end, is the best move to learn, as he leaves himself wide open as it finishes. Same with his grab, and that fireball explosion move, all great moments to hit him back. I took so long to whittle down his phase 1 health, he felt insane to fight. So color me surprised that base Serpent Messmer, his phase 2, was, well, easy. I one-shot him. His snake attacks are threatening, but he's left so open after each attack string, you've got more than enough time to punish him. And since he innovates on his already existing moveset, if you know his dodge timings for phase 1, you know his dodge timings for phase 2. Hold your nerve, you'll get through it just fine. Voters, over to you. Messmer is my new favourite Elden Ring boss. Even my previous favourite, Melania, can take you out of the experience with a random stagger cancel or an unlucky waterfowl. A lot of Elden Ring bosses can feel like this between their ridiculous AoEs, input reads, degenerate delayed attacks, and insistence on playing keep away. It tends to take you out of that famous dance, the hypnotic flow state you enter when you begin to understand how the boss behaves and moves and you start to move with it. The tension and catharsis you feel when you finally perform the dance and defeat the boss is unmatched. It's the experience I want when I play a Souls game. There's a lot to say about Messmer. His design is daunting and unforgettable, his arena is atmospheric and ominous, his lore is layered, tragic, and enthralling, but the genius of his fight is just that, the fight. His moves don't make sense at first, it feels impossible, but every time you die, you learn why, and you pick up his moveset bit by bit. Pretty soon you're back in that trance, weaving through his fire, spear, and snakes. He's the kind of boss that takes you 100 tries, but when you finally defeat him, you feel like you could defeat him 100 times more. The rest of the DLC was decidedly Elden Ring in its style, but when I fought Messmer, I was dancing again. You've hit the nail on the head. The best Soulsborne boss battles are those that seem insurmountable upon first glance, but subconsciously you begin to pick up their tells, learn their moves, and soon you'll find yourself dodging attacks you never thought you could. Messmer's first phase is exactly this type of journey, and once you reach a second phase, you're able to take everything you've learned and can apply it to come out on top. Spectacular comment, whoever you are. After 3 weeks of playing the DLC, I can confidently say he is my favourite Souls boss ever, enough where sitting down and practicing him is a thrilling experience. I have beat this boss around 100 times now with various restrictions and as a summon, and almost nothing in this fight is unreactable or BS. This fight is not without its flaws, however. A few of his moves have wonky hitboxes on the tail end of the attacks when dodged up close. I'm looking at you, flame spin into ground scraping thrust. And a few moves of his just serve as a disengagement tool with very few punish windows. Despite these incredibly minor flaws, I still adore this fight and go out of my way to fight him on every playthrough. And even though I have spent so much time fighting this serpent, I'm still finding new punish windows during the middle of his attacks. The coolest one is during his AOW attack. If you roll directly inwards on the second part of the move, you can actually get a hit in while it's ending, and it looks insanely stylish. A more practical one though is in phase 2, where if you roll with his drill lunge attack, you can get a tap R2 off with almost any weapon completely safe. All this is a really long way of saying that this boss's difficulty is entirely up to the player's ability to understand his moveset in and out, and the difficulty lies in how much effort you are willing to spend doing so, and why I personally find him to be the easiest boss in the DLC. I'll be honest, when I read comments that go into specific move combos and hitbox timings, my brain kinda switches off, but I wanted to include this one anyway because I know a lot of people in my audience do care about these concepts and understand exactly what this person is saying. I want to make sure you're getting fed. That and calling Messmer the easiest boss of the DLC because of how much you practiced him is such a fucking power move, I've gotta respect it, fair play to you. Messmer is probably the boss I feel the most divided about when it comes to quality overall in the DLC. I love how telegraphed his moveset is and how easy it is to read and learn in general, but one thing that truly annoys me about him is that his moveset is what I call a lunging moveset, meaning his attacks typically send him flying across the arena and makes me chase him to continue the fight. I honestly hate when the boss's whole moveset revolves around this notion. TLDR, do I think Messmer is a good fight? Yes. Do I like his moveset? No. I do actually think this moveset works for Messmer, if only because were he a lot more stationary, his health pool wouldn't withstand the pressure. He's already quite low in HP compared to some fights in the game, and we've already got complaints of people beating him too quickly because of that fact. So maybe it's for the best that he's a bit mobile, even if your complaint is totally valid. Honestly, I'm surprised Messmer didn't make it to number 3, but I guess that trio of top 3 bosses are just that strong. At number 3, we have Bale the Dread, who scored a total average of 8.24 out of 10. And he also scored 3rd favourite with 125 votes. Go Bale! He and Midra are the clear optional highlights of the DLC, each with their own unique zones dedicated purely to them. And I love FromSoft leaning into this trend. Bale being described as the worst of the dragons had me excited given how much I adore Placidusax from the main game, and he managed to stand up there with the best of them. Even at Shadowtree Blessing 20, I was still finding Bale incredibly tough to handle. His moveset is vast, and his attacks hit hard and have insane range to them. He's got a surprising amount of agility for someone missing a leg, and that tail of his is a deadly weapon you do not want to get hit by. With both fire and lightning damage due to his breath attack, alongside the insanity that is his enraged state with the spectral wings and the drive-by shootings as he takes to the air, alongside some insane AoEs and an OST that never fails to make the fight hype, Bale scares me. I could only beat him by summoning Egon. It would have likely taken me upwards of 50 to 100 attempts without everyone's favourite Dragon Slayer, so I fully accept him being this high on the list. And while I'm not sure everyone will agree, I really do find his moveset fair, and I think it's going to be very learnable for the future. Vile voters, what do you think? Oh god, this boss is awesome! The spectacle, the build-up, the fight, Egon, damn it! His lines during that fight are god tier, man! Oddly, kind of a gimmick fight too if you use the Dragon Hunter katana. I only found this out because I used it on him in my first playthrough of the DLC and beat him on my second try. Not bragging here, just something I noticed. Bale took chunky damage when I used the katana skill, and before I knew it, the fight was already over. Then, I came back and fought him without it. He walloped me a good 7 to 8 times before I claimed victory. So his difficulty is there, but I guess it just depends on your approach to the fight. Do you want it cinematic? Do you want difficulty? Do you want to help Egon get his vengeance? Bale just has so many options for scaling, it's honestly quite interesting when you can see all the options available. Who knew Bale was a versatile king? I actually didn't bother with the Dragon Hunter katana because I honestly forgot it was a thing until the end game when I used it to slay all the basic drakes and dragons in the open world. Might have to give it a whirl with Bale at some point, although I really want to give his moveset an in-depth learn on my next go-around. He's got a lot of options to make the fight easier, but unlike Needle Knight Leather, where if you go summonless you'll get your ass kicked, here the fight is obviously balanced around a solo encounter. Bale becomes a puppy chasing a toy when Egon's involved, but on your own, he'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Bale has surpassed Midir as my favourite dragon boss in all of Souls. His design is just so fucking cool. He looks evil, which fits his build-up so well, and really helps sell the fact that he was the one responsible for weakening Placidusax and severing some of his heads. Not to mention it helps justify the legendary Egon's hilarious hatred towards him. As for the fight itself, I also think it's extremely hard, speaking as a solo-only player. I tried one run summoning Egon and found having someone else to draw aggro away from you made him way easier. But he's also quite fair. He has a very deep moveset, by far the most complicated among all the dragons in the series, yet it all feels so well put together and still provides ample punish opportunities. Then there's the phase transition. God, that might be the coolest thing From has ever done. I don't think there's anything I can write that can aptly capture the spectacle of Bale growing wings, flying around the arena with fireballs raining down at you before he swoops in with a crazy dive bomb attack, all amidst the intensifying storm. Bale is the most metal shit FromSoft has ever made, and I fucking love him. Join the club, my man, join the club. Bale takes what could be a fight with so much visual clutter and manages to make it work. I think the arena being quite dark also helps because the light effects contrast nicely with the background, which is a stark difference to Radahn's fight where everything is just too damn bright. He has so much style, so much substance, and is one of the few bosses that justifies his difficulty both in lore and in-game, while not being so hard that he feels insurmountable. You'll get just enough of a taste of victory each time you fight him, to where you know you'll eventually overcome him, and I just think that's neat. Bale, 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 Bale. He is the hardest for me. The second is Radahn, but Radahn's combos are always the same and give a really good rhythm, but every time I do Bale, he bites me to death, except for the charged lightning bite. These combo enders also end me all the time. The rest isn't easy either, but the bites always get me and force me to heal, equals he can punish. On top of that, he moves his head 0.0000000000001 millimeters away after every attack, so I miss. Radahn is either a train or a pillar. Bale is a professional martial arts fighter trained only on dodging. Much love to Egon, I hate him as much as he does. I even learned all the dialogue. And so I'll end it on a curse you, Bale! I see though why people love him, I just can't get to that point on perfect learning. And much love to you, Billy, keep up the good work. Yeah, these types of bosses aren't for everyone, and by God, his bites are brutal when they want to be. I got caught by his grabs specifically more often than I care to admit, but his regular Maw attacks are tough to avoid as well. Bale feels like a fair challenge that I'm rather excited to take on again, something I really can't say for one of our remaining entries. But first... At number 2, we have R'Larna, Twin Moon Knight, who scored a total average of 8.27 out of 10. On the one hand, I knew R'Larna would be high up on this poll. She's got insane combo game, two very distinct states to her fight, with the enraged state really upping the ante on how tough she can be, and she's basically the second coming of Pontiff Sullivan, who was also ranked exceptionally high in my Dark Souls 3 boss difficulty poll. She was also one of the bosses I spent the most time on trying to defeat during my playthrough, But I guess being the true early DLC wall for most players trying to reach Altus leaves an impression on people, and she managed to pit Bale to the runner-up spot. Once again, R'Larna deserved an introductory cutscene. Her boss arena felt so random in terms of how you reach it, and yet who cares, her fight is amazing. She has combos for days that you have to learn to interrupt as best you can to get your hits in. Let her lead the fight and you're not getting anywhere. For me, guard countering was the key, as I was able to chip away at her entire first 50% of health with that strategy. Get a great shield, counter the safe attacks, take a few risks if I know the stun is coming, get those viscerals, and dodge her Carian's sword magic as I go. I've got phase 1 down. But once the magic comes out, I kinda panic. Shielding causes you to take chip damage from the magic and the fire on her swords, and while both her magic slices and her fire tornado moves are easy to avoid, she still feels insanely threatening and uses them to zone you out so she can easily launch into her next attack. And if she charges up those moons, you best know the timing. It's deceptive on when you need to jump to dodge, and the third strike is slightly delayed just to give you a real challenge. So many attempts where she'd shred me almost immediately into the fight, but giving you that sensation that you're getting better and better until you know her tells and can put up a good bout. I honestly think she's one of the fairest fights in the DLC, despite the extremely high skill ceiling, and I'm curious to see who agrees. For me, R'Larna was the most difficult boss because of the speed at which she can go into certain attacks. I probably don't have the fastest reaction time in the world, which meant that for the beginning of some combos, I was physically incapable of reacting to them in time, which forced me to roll preemptively and get hit a lot. Welcome to the club, I'm right there with you. It sometimes feels like I'm trying to play a game of chess, predicting which combos are going to come out before they happen, because she's just so fast it's that hard to react. It's why in her phase 1, having a good shield and decent stamina goes a long way towards blocking the first hit or two of her combo, so you can react accordingly afterwards. She tests reaction speeds to their limit, and that's the tea. Of all the bosses in the DLC, the one I had the most fun fighting, that felt fair, and that I actively wanted to learn perfectly, was R'Larna. She felt just manageable enough that I stuck it out to form a strategy that didn't include a Spirit Ash for once, waiting out her combos behind a shield to guard counter and poise break phase 1, then swapping to lightning incantations for the second phase to stay out of range. She actually reminded me of my time fighting the Weeping Peninsula's ancient hero of Zamor in my first playthrough, where I resorted to the same tactic. She's my favourite in part because she triggered that nostalgia to my first run. Funnily enough, the way you handled phase 1 is actually how my partner tends to play these games, since he uses big shields in conjunction with big weapons, and I vividly recall him beating that ancient hero of Zamor the exact same way. It's what inspired me to try guard countering more often, leading to that very simple R'Larna phase 1. Love that you had to go full ranged for phase 2 though, a very brave choice, I definitely respect it, and I love that you prove it's a viable strategy. R'Larna is everything I ever wanted from Malenia. She feels the most like a Dark Souls 3 boss due to how challenging but fair her moveset is, and that's all I ever wanted from these DLC bosses. A badass female sword fighter who has seemingly endless combos, string mix-ups, fantastic soundtrack, and a giant move that will spell instant death if not avoided properly? Sign me up! It's when Lifesteal, Relentless Super Armor, Scarlet Rot, and a less than straightforward super move are added that makes the premise less than desirable for me. When I died to R'Larna, I knew why. Her super move was reasonable, yet still stressful, to dodge, because of it requiring jumping at the proper time. In my opinion, she's leagues beyond what Malenia's fight was aiming to do, and that soundtrack will live in my heart forever. It's certainly an interesting comparison being made. She shares a lot of similarities with our Malenia, and yet I agree she's a far more fair fight by comparison. I sincerely hope we never see a lifesteal mechanic ever again, but now I'm imagining R'Larna with lifesteal and I want to cry. She manages to reach a level of difficulty that's near to Malenia without any of the bullshit. Perhaps not to the same heights, but I think we're closer than we think. Tougher than most of the base game fights for sure. And yet R'Larna was always playing for second best because there was never any doubt who was topping this poll. And number 1, we have Radahn, Consort of Miquella. who scored a total average of 9.89 out of 10, breaking the previous record of 9.415 held by Luxasia the Complete from Lies of P. I don't expect this record to ever be broken, because as it stands, Radahn is currently considered the hardest boss in Elden Ring, and thus the hardest boss in Soulsborne. Malenia may be able to contend him, but with how much her fight has been optimized over the last 2 years, I don't even think people would rank her over a 9 at this point. The Consort of Miquella received 706 votes for hardest boss on my poll out of a possible 747. And the biggest gag, we only had 2 people who wanted to fuck around and rank Radahn as a 1 out of 10. Even the trolls were like, nah, these guys are cracked. This fight was so hard that I had to eventually Mimic tier Bleed Weapon Great Shield my way to victory, and that shit felt hollow. One of my least proud wins I've ever had in a video game. I will be rectifying that in the future. His phase 1 is tough but manageable. He does insane levels of damage, don't get me wrong, but with the gravity magic and his deceptive combos, you can eventually gain some form of mastery, or at the very least you can manage to trade damage for a net positive. But you want to hear about his phase 2. Promised Consort Radahn is just, for now, too much for me to handle. There's just so much visual clutter going on in this fight, what with the after images that are there to distract you, or the 50 billion holy lights raining down from the heavens, or Miquella's Goldilocks hair flailing about the place. It's all to the point that I just can't comprehend what I'm seeing. I will legit need to wait for a step-by-step guide showcasing every attack before I can remotely feel comfortable diving back in. And the frame rate tanks when he's cloning on PS4, thanks. But as many people have pointed out, your goal in this form is to stay as close to the boss as you can, as most of the AoE holy damage goes outwards from his location, and the closer you are to him, the less likely any of it will hit you. Obviously this is much harder said than done, but we have seen videos of people doing it rune level 1. I just think that Radahn came so out of nowhere, and his difficulty was so above anything else in the DLC, that it stands out in the same way Malenia did back when Elden Ring first came out. Some people swear this is the best fight of all time, while others detest it with a passion. I've never seen people more divided on a fight, and it's fascinating to watch in real time. So let's get some of those people to talk, shall we? Now fair warning, there's over 250 comments talking about Radahn, and I have to pick 3, so I'm gonna go with some smaller yet concise comments to discuss this fight, starting with: the discourse around Radahn fascinates me, because yes, he is the hardest alongside Malenia, but the DLC has also delivered on so many tools and options that can really change the game against him, which makes him easier than Malenia in my book, alongside his constant aggression being more predictable, I'd argue. The single addition of the Deflect hard tier put me in a mindset where I didn't find myself giving up and deciding to summon, like my first attempt fighting Malenia for instance. But it does make you wish some of these combat mechanics weren't something you need to use/equip, but they're by default. The problem with this discourse is that so many Souls players see there being one way to play these games. Summonless, no cheesy builds, no Mimic tier, no consumables, no controller, and it's created a very toxic mindset among elitist players who want to brag about their accomplishments, but don't always want to put the work in to reach that level. I'm guilty of it myself in some instances, which is why I really tried to promote to everyone to just play the game how you want. Use summons, use Ashes of War, use cheesy strategies, do whatever feels right and satisfying for you to win each fight. And once people accept that there are a lot of ways around Radahn if you want to change up your build, I think the discussion on his difficulty will die down slightly. Now in my case, I wanted to put the work in with Radahn, but I also wanted to get Shadow of the Erdtree videos out to my viewers, so I pressured myself into finishing the last few DLC fights in a way I wasn't truly satisfied with. And I really wish I'd stuck with my original strats, so it all comes down to personal preference. Do you want to use all the new tools at your disposal to overcome the fight? Or do you want to use a build you're attached to as a matter of pride? Side note, I really need to try that Deflect hard tier out. I didn't understand what it did when I got it, so I never experimented. Time for a good Google guide, I guess. I think Consort Radahn is an unfortunate product of FromSoft trying to do so many badass things with a boss at once. He has cool sound design, cool lore, cool attacks, cool visuals, etc., But all at once, when I actually fought him, it all became overwhelming. And the constant onslaught of attacks with the light beams and Miquella's hair covering my screen, I really couldn't tell what was going on until I was once again back at the side of Grace. It doesn't help that summoning the guys I worked so hard to get on my side makes the fight about 20 times longer. You know what? Why can't we summon Arnsbach and Tiolier in the same way we summon Egon in Bale's fight? Why can't we enter the boss arena first, then summon them via summoning signs in the boss room so we don't get that awful bloated boss health bar from having summons enter the fog gate? It'd certainly go a long ways towards making Phase 2 feel a bit less difficult if you can keep the other two alive, to handle Miquella's insane hair extensions and flashbangs. Although I fully understand how some people think Radahn, Consort of Miquella is too difficult, I personally loved it for that reason and would even call it my favourite of the DLC. Being a Souls game fan since 2012, most new bosses aren't too difficult and take maybe a couple of tries at most, but Consort Radahn kicked my ass and it reminded me of why I fell in love with Dark Souls 1 Prepare to Die edition all those years ago. I struggled, slowly learning moves as I kept dying, had to reevaluate my build and strategy, and finally felt like I was really being challenged again. To then have it culminate in that final attempt where I barely managed to beat him with a sliver of health left felt so extremely rewarding. Persevering and beating fights that you initially don't think you can achieve is what the Souls games are all about for me, and Consort Radahn brought that feeling back beautifully as the more challenging and difficult the boss is, the more accomplished you feel when you fell them. There is something to be said about that feeling of sheer bliss when you overcome a tough obstacle. The serotonin that shoots through your veins, the excitement and the elation at finally succeeding at something you've put your blood, sweat and tears into. And if Radahn, Consort of Miquella is the toughest boss FromSoft has put out, then for those who saw the fight through to the end, they've experienced the best form of excitement possible. It's a high we chase as Souls players, looking for the next big challenge to surmount. But I think Radahn is a turning point, as many people will realise they don't have what it takes to complete his fight in the way they desire. Do you choose to stick to your path, or do you alter your build and fundamentals for the victory? Art thou truly of passing skill, or art thou just a pretender to the throne? That's something only you, the player, can decide based on your own personal criteria. We all have our limits, and I'll freely admit at the moment Radahn so far has passed mine. Whatever the case, I think it's safe to say that for the foreseeable future, Radahn, Consort of Miquella, Promised Consort Radahn, is the hardest boss in Shadow of the Erdtree. And that's the list. Did you agree with the community placements? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. Keep an eye on my community tab as well, as very soon we'll be getting the Sekiro Shadows Die Twice boss difficulty poll on the go. How fun. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow me if you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord. The Twitter is the best place to go though, I'm just gonna be blunt with you. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. Thank you so much, we're at 15 now, that's pretty crazy. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.